Well, good afternoon to everyone who's joining us, and welcome to this NGA webinar on being strategic and developing a strategy which achieves the vision for your school or your trust. My name's Steve Edmonds. I'm NGA's Director of Advice and Guidance, and it's a pleasure to be with you today. If you've not attended one of our webinars before, then you won't know that they last for about 40 minutes and that we welcome any questions or comments submitted via the chat function, which we'll answer by email after the webinar. The slides and any links to resources that we mention will be sent to you as well after the webinar, and we're recording this, and the recording will be made available probably tomorrow or certainly shortly after the webinar on the NGA website. So you have the opportunity to watch again or refer or recommend it to your colleagues, which we're very grateful if you're able to do that. So I'd like to share with you what I intend to cover in today's webinar on being strategic. Three fundamental aspects, really. First of all, the process of developing a strategy and how that actually works, the mechanics of it, the aspects of what goes into that, the sort of discussions you'll be having about strategy development, the kind of questions you'll be asking along the way, and some important specific aspects like risk management and stakeholder engagement, which make the process work and work in the interests of your school, your trust, but above all your pupils. Now, I appreciate that this is familiar territory for many of you, but I hope you'll agree that it's territory that's certainly worth revisiting. In essence, what I'd like to do today in this webinar is talk about what we want to achieve for our children and our young people, how we bring about improvement and success for our schools and our trusts, knowing what that looks like, and how we bring people along with us on that journey. Along the way, we need to set the right pace and support and challenge our leaders to implement the strategy. We need to make good decisions about where the limited resources we have at our disposal are best directed, and also create the conditions for the strategy to succeed. And I'll be talking a little bit about culture in this webinar as well. It's an interesting time, isn't it, really, to be doing a webinar on strategy, because I think more and more often boards and leaders are finding themselves in survival mode more than strategic mode. And that's because of the huge challenges that schools are facing now for a variety of reasons. Most of them are linked to the economy. And I think it's important for me to say that whilst we should never lose sight of our vision and what we want to achieve for our schools and for our communities, it's important that you know that NGA gets how difficult it is to be strategic in the current climate, and that we remain absolutely committed to ensuring that your voice is heard in discussions about improving the system and the conditions that allow you to do your job well on behalf of your pupils, whether that's through improving funding or more intelligent accountability. So what I have to say this afternoon is very much in that context and with that level of understanding that the theory is one thing and the reality is certainly another. But nevertheless, we shall proceed. My reference point for the webinar is our guide, NGA's Guide to Being Strategic, which we produce alongside the school leaders organisations, ASCL and NAHT, and that's very important because strategic strategy development is a joint endeavour. It is something that should be done in a collaborative way, and I'll touch on that in a moment. But the guide to being strategic is a step-by-step guide. It's very practical and it's very relatable. If you're a chair of a governing board or you provide professional support to boards, then you may well have referred to it when you're delivering training on strategic governance or at a governance away day, you know, that valuable opportunity we have probably once a year to come together as a team and discuss where we are and where we want to be. And being strategic has always been designed with that in mind. And I'm pleased to announce today that we published a new and updated and refreshed version of Being Strategic, or should I say versions of Being Strategic, because that's for the first time we're providing 2 distinct versions of the guide. One is for governing boards in single schools, single academy trusts, and that concentrates on developing a strategy for a single school. And then we also have one for multi-academy trusts, which looks at strategy development for the MAT as a single organisation and implementing that vision and that strategy across schools. Now, both versions have the same structure and they both convey the same fundamental aspects of developing a strategy. And that's because those fundamental aspects apply whether it's a school or any other type of successful organisation. You could apply those aspects to a multinational company, to a small business, to a charity, to a public service. Those things don't change. But where the guides differ is in how they explain how those aspects are applied in a one school context compared to a multi-school context. So what strategy development looks like if you're a larger scale employer, have multiple sites, different legal obligations. We think the opportunity and the time was right to make those distinctions to help you do that job as governing boards more effectively. So we hope very much that you'll take a look at the new guides, and we'll send a link with the webinar slides. And I should say a little bit about the trust version, because that's also in sync with the recently published trust quality descriptions. And if you'd like to dive deeper into what strategic governance in a MAT and the sector, the MAT sector actually means, and those descriptions of trust quality, then I would thoroughly recommend the webinar that my colleague Sam Henson delivered in April on strategic governance in MATs, which explores some of these concepts, or some of these areas to be more specific, in more detail. But the overarching expectations that the DFE has of multi-academy trusts, that as the trust board sets and champions the strategy, the executive team implements the operating model that delivers the strategy, and then it both come together to review progress and ensure alignment. They're themes that have been covered in Being Strategic for a number of years, since its inception, in various updates. But we also take this opportunity on this occasion, this update, to look at some of those expectations around school improvement, workforce, operations, and governance and leadership in more detail, just to make it more relatable to that audience. And if you govern at local level in a multi-academy trust, on an academy committee or a local governing body, then we've also thought very carefully about how to make Being Strategic meaningful to you as well. There is a clear local governance thread in both versions, but we're recommending that you use a single school version as your primary source. Now, you'll know that not all academy committees have the same role and responsibilities when it comes to developing the strategy for their school, or the trust or the MAT that their school is part of. How you're involved and what's expected of you will depend on the MAT and the direction the MAT has given you. But what NGA says, and continues to say, is that those governing locally in a MAT need to and should indeed have a meaningful role and opportunity to influence the strategic direction, not only of their school, but also of the trust that they're part of, and ensuring that they're playing their part in that strategy being implemented at school level, so it's successful. And we say that quite simply because all the evidence point to that being an ingredient of success for multi-academy trusts, the strong and meaningful involvement of local governance. And that's a nice segue into mentioning our most recent report on local governance, which I know many of you have read and commented on. We published it last month. It's called Local Governance Here and Now, and it really does, through first-hand accounts, reinforce how integral academy committees and local governance is to the success of a multi-academy trust, and indeed that means the future of a trust-based system, or an increasingly trust-based system. So I'd thoroughly recommend that as further reading that underpins many of the things I'm going to be discussing today on strategy development. But if I was asked to say what is the underlying theme of both guides, then I would say there are two of them really, and they are collaboration and connectedness. Developing a strategy really should be a team effort. The executive, the head teachers, and the governing boards coming together to articulate their vision and produce a high-level strategy for achieving it. And if you govern at any level in a school or a trust, then you really do need to feel that that strategy is something you've been involved in and are part of creating and have ownership of, because if you don't, it's very difficult to relate to it. And if you can't relate to it, then it's very difficult to ensure that the accountability is there and that you're setting the right pace for its implementation. So you have to be really involved in a development stage to carry out the monitoring and the accountability aspects. And it's also more than that. It's a really tangible demonstration, that collaboration of those things that I touched on earlier. That our shared ambition for our pupils, our commitment to always doing the right thing, and that's not easy in the current climate, and the common values and the ethos that we want to see portrayed in the daily life of our schools or our family of schools. And that's why stakeholders and our pupils, our parents, our staff, our communities, trade unions, professional associations, faith groups, they're all so important and matter so much, and we really do need to be connected to them when we're developing strategy, and they need to feel connected to us, because if we don't involve them in the process and gain their buy-in, then your strategy really doesn't have the legitimacy that it needs to create that shared sense of ownership and purpose, because we can't do this on our own. Governors alone, trustees alone, school leaders alone don't make schools successful. It's a team community effort where we all come together, pulling in the right direction, as indeed so it's really important, and that's why those two underlying themes of collaboration and connectedness run through being strategic. I mentioned that the structure of the guide and the stages of strategy development that successful organisations follow are the same in both versions of the guides, and they are listed there, as you can see on the slide there. And those stages happen throughout the year in a cycle of creating or updating the strategy, monitoring its implementation, and then a reflection and a review at a fixed point in the year, which leads into the cycle beginning again. And I'm going to be talking briefly about each stage, but it goes without saying that what we're not talking about here is every year starting with a blank piece of paper. This is a rolling process. It's an evolution of where you want to be and a progression. Where to quote the vision statement from the trust that I govern at, where better never ends. We're always striving for more and better on behalf of our pupils and our communities. So I'm going to take you through each of these 7 stages, and I'm going to start with the first stage, which is values and vision. And this is a fundamental stage and probably the most important stage, I would say, in the whole process of being strategic and developing a strategy. It's not to be taken lightly. And the new guides include some questions that will frame discussions about your values and your vision for your school or your trust, and to help you get to the heart of how you approach what you do and treat one another. What do you want your school or trust to be known for and live by? how you communicate those values and embed them throughout your organisation, how they resonate beyond with your stakeholders, and then moving on to your vision and ambition for the future. Does that speak to the values that you hold? Is there clarity? Do people understand what you're striving for, what you're looking to achieve? Is that grounded? Is that grounded in reality? Sorry, I've just jumped on a slide there because I have one or two technical issues, which I'm just going to resolve there for a moment. Thank you. And that stage is fundamental. And we know that some of you serve on governing boards that have appointed working groups to look closely at these things and make recommendations. And for schools in a multi-academy trust, this process is likely to involve the local tier of governance and incorporate the vision and priorities for the MAT as a single organisation. But the real message about that first stage of sitting down and setting values and vision is that no strategy will succeed if there's not clarity of thought about what type of organisation you are, what your core values are, and what they mean, and what you want to achieve for your pupils and communities. And that is an evolutionary process. Your values and your vision are not going to change radically every year, but it's more likely that they will evolve and adapt to the organisational learning and any new perspectives that you have on board. And I should also say something about terminology before I talk about this second stage of self-evaluation. So if you govern at a school or a trust that has a religious character, then you might hear vision or mission even being expressed in a slightly different way because it has its own specific meaning in your context. And so when you're having those conversations about clarifying your vision and your mission, you should really be doing that with reference to any sort of underpinning documents provided by your religious authority and the advice of the relevant body, because that will help inform your thinking. And it's that thinking that really brings us on to the next stage, that clarity of thought, which is self-evaluation, which if you do this well, it's going to highlight your strengths and your areas for development, as well as those opportunities for you to capitalize on. Now, I'm not, schools are well practiced in self-evaluation. They've been doing it for a long time. But from a governing board point of view, we have a really important job in ensuring that it does not become too much of a navel-gazing exercise. We need to follow the evidence and do our best to interpret it. So the guide highlights some fundamental areas to assess and areas for development, whether it's a single school context or a MAT, using the self-evaluation techniques such as SWOT and PESTLE analysis alongside your data, techniques and devices that you'll be familiar with, to alongside the feedback, which you can see, the type of feedback that you can capitalize on, which is on the slide there, to get to the bottom of how you're performing as an organization, what your main strengths and areas for development are, how effectively you're using the resources, your current and future capacity, your risks of future success and sustainability, and what opportunities you might have to develop or grow and deliver better for your pupils. And I know these are themes, and this is how your away days generally take shape, I'm sure. But that self-evaluation stage is crucial because it leads very much onto that third stage, which is honing in on what your priorities are, because self-evaluation will have given you that platform. You should be focusing on those things which really will have the most impact on achieving your vision. What is going to make your school or trust what you want it to be? What's going to transform outcomes for your pupils and your communities? So you can see some of the areas there on this slide that your priorities, your limited number of priorities might be linked to. They might have a focus on staffing. They might have a focus on school improvements, on taking a certain future direction, on getting closer to your stakeholders, or strengthening the leadership capacity of the organisation, or more likely, it's going to be a combination of all those things that make it into those limited number of priorities that you have in your high-level strategy document. And that's the first mention of the high-level strategy document in this webinar, because we do recommend that boards, all boards, have a high-level strategy document that is distinct from those detailed improvement plans which leaders oversee and manage. But it is that point of reference for you that keeps you on track and focused on the things that you really want to achieve over the course of a year, 2 or 3 years. And in Being Strategic, this version of Being Strategic, both versions, we have an example high-level strategy document which you can use and adapt for your context. So that stage of self-evaluation gives you the platform really to focus in and have those conversations, and the guide, I think, will help you with some of those reflective questions to get to the heart of what you really, what really matters and where your priorities actually lie. And once you have that clarity, once you know where your priorities lie, you can start to think more carefully and closely about achieving them and what success looks like. And it really is important to attach success criteria, because that brings clarity more than anything else. It creates that sense of purpose. You know what you're working towards, and it brings meaning to your monitoring as a governing board. When you're undertaking visits or reviewing data or having discussions in committee, you need to have a sort of very clear sense of what actually you're trying to achieve. This isn't radical thinking or what I'm saying here, but success criteria is fundamental. And what we say is you shouldn't really stray too far from the received wisdom of objectives that are SMART. They're specific enough to understand them. You can actually measure them, so they're tangible enough to do that. They're realistic, so that you can achieve them in your context, and that when you're looking to see the change and the transformation over a period of time. And there on that slide is a sort of example using school attendance, which is a very big issue for our system at the moment, our school system at the moment, as an example of a high-level strategic objective that might find its way into a strategy document of improving attendance of all pupils across the school, and what success looks like there in broader statements, and how we'll go about focusing on that then in more detailed through more detailed plans. So that's a high-level objective there, and real clarity on what we're trying to achieve, and that's very much in keeping with what Being Strategic is all about. So I'm going to move on to step 5, which is risk, and ensuring that the risks attached to your strategic objectives, in fact, whether that's following them or indeed not following them, are being properly assessed. And this is another crucial stage. It's risk evaluation is far more than a dry compliance process. It's your opportunity to evaluate whether what you want to achieve is going to have some unintended consequences. And it's a fascinating topic, risk management. It really warrants a webinar and an expert presenter of its own. It's more of an art than a science. And in trusts, multi-academy in trusts where there are more clear and specific requirements to record and assess risks, that's because the implications of it going wrong, I guess, are more likely to be far-reaching. It's going to be embedded into your governance routines, probably less so in a maintained school environment, but although we do recommend that it is. And we also recommend that risk management is something that drives your strategic conversations, your decision making, rather than is just something that you monitor. So if you're thinking about, for example, pursuing a certain school improvement objective, is that going to have an impact on the well-being of your staff? How do we mitigate for that risk? Is there a financial sustainability risk for a particular a strategy that we are pursuing around staffing or leadership and management. How do we mitigate for those risks? Are we making the right assumptions about them? Are we clear on what those risks are? And can we take action? And any effective risk management routine, one that's RAG rated, red, amber, green, that process that we're well used to, it does open the door for candid conversations about the things that you have to confront if you want to bring about change and improvement. So, if your systems aren't strong enough, your capacity is limited, and your standards are too low, then those are real and presenting risks that need to be confronted. So it's a very important part of strategy development, as is resourcing. Now, each priority that you identify in your strategy should have a clear estimate of the level of resource required to implement it. Otherwise, quite simply, you're leaving too much to chance. Now, those resources could be deployment of staff, people and time, the acquisition of goods and services, development costs, all those types of things. And we need to think carefully and seek the right advice from our head teachers, our CEO, accounting officers, our chief financial officers and school business professionals about the resources that we have available, and making the most of what we do have available to ensure that we can resource our strategy. And for us as governing boards, we lean very heavily on financial data and forecasting, so that needs to be accurate and well presented. We have tools at our disposal like SFVS in maintained schools resource management self-assessment checklists in academies that can act as important points of reference. And there are disciplines like integrated curriculum and financial planning, which we provide separate guidance on, and indeed we've done a webinar on this, which allows us to really clarify whether we have the resource, how we're allocating our resources to meet educational priorities whilst maintaining, whilst not exceeding the operational costs beyond our income. So resourcing those priorities is really important, and more important than ever, because resources are scarce in schools, and you don't need me to tell you that, and underfunding is a huge issue for the sector, and it really does impact on strategy development. And again, it's worth saying that NGA is, very much aware that you are limited right now in what you can do strategically because of that issue. So we will continue to make that point and that case for better funding and a better resource system. In fact, next week we are joining with the other educational organisations in a lobby of Parliament, where we'll be making this case once again to MPs to ensure, at the very least, that these issues are considered and continue to be considered by government, because we know that it's not easy out there by any means. But we have our priorities, we've assessed the risk, we've resourced them. Now we're thinking about that part of the cycle where we're considering how well they're being met, whether they're on course to be met. If not, what the reasons are for that, and what's the implications for our strategy. What actions, what adjustments, what support and challenge do we need to put in place to get our strategic priorities on track and ensuring that they're met, so that we have the impact on our pupils. Now, monitoring and evaluation is an established governing discipline. You'll know how that works, and you'll know that it works best if the information that you receive, particularly those in head teacher and CEO reports, references the strategy, references what we're trying to achieve, and you have that clarity of understanding when it comes to the progress that's been made. So RAG rating systems are always good, that you can use alongside the data that you have at your disposal. And when the data backs up what the reporting is saying about progress, and with what you're seeing with your own eyes, then you can have reasonable and more than reasonable confidence that you're on the right track. And of course, this is where committees and link trustee and governor roles come into their own, and certainly local governance in multi-academy trusts, because it allows you to do that more forensic analysis that gives you the confidence, the assurance, and the platform to have those conversations about what's working well, what isn't, and how we support each other, to change it. And that's, you know, that's very, very important. So what you see with your own eyes should not be underestimated either. So I'd like to talk a little bit about visits as we carry out as governors and trustees. A huge privilege that we have in our role, and really fundamental, not only to understanding progress in terms of strategy, but also getting a feel for the organisations that we govern at. Now, if you're part of a multi-academy trust board, and you carry out visits in a trustee capacity, then, you know, if you're in a larger trust, how that works in practice will obviously be dictated to some extent by the size and geography of the trust, and again, that reinforces the real importance of having good local governance structure and communication between a trust board and a local tier to support that evaluation. And on the practice of visits and getting the most out of them, and how we carry them out in a meaningful way to get the information we need, we produce guidance on that, which I would very much recommend as a starting point for planning your visits as a board over the course of the year, to evaluate the success on progress of your strategy. So I've moved through fairly quickly those 7 stages, which started with clarity of thought and vision, and end with that monitoring and review process that leads us back into the cycle. So not radical, as I was saying, but, you know, quite fundamental, and all successful organisations follow a version of that process to get to where they want to be, and you know, we as governing boards should be no different, and because that's going to take us a long way, but it won't take us all the way towards being successful. Success isn't going to come unless we remain true to our values, and as I said earlier, unless we bring people with us. So both versions of being strategic have sections on communicating the strategy and creating the right structure for the strategy to succeed. So when we think about communicating our strategy, what we want to achieve, we should really be aiming to get that shared sense of ownership amongst our parents, our pupils, you know, our wider stakeholders, the people we work with. And so they really need a level of understanding about the difference that achieving our vision is going to make to our pupils and to them. They need clarity on the role that they play, in achieving that vision, and that's particularly important, I think, with parents. And we also need to think about how that messaging about those things is tailored to those different audiences, whether it's our staff, whether it's the people in communities that we know who have influence, who can help us there. These conversations are very important around stakeholder engagement, because they're what makes the strategy fly and live and breathe and flourish. To see it just as an internal process is really condemning it ultimately, I think, to the strategy falling short. So, you know, how are we going to reach out to people? How are we going to get these messages across about what we're trying to achieve here? You know, is it through our website, through, you know, briefings, events, networking opportunities, social media? What are we doing well? What can we capitalize on? And again, no apologies for mentioning just how important the local tier of governance in a multi-academy trust is, as the eyes and ears on the ground, and as that conduit between a trust and the communities that it serves. So that's really important aspect, communicating a strategy. But culture, as our CEO Emma Knights often reminds us, is what really makes the difference. The way things are done and how everyone you touch and come into contact with in your school and trust sees your humanity and your compassion, your openness and your transparency, your high expectations, the way you balance challenge and support, your commitment to developing and learning and growing and flourishing, and indeed your sensitivity to diverse views and other narratives. What kind of trust or school or trust do you want to convey? How do you want to live and breathe, so to speak? And if you're not creating those conditions, then no strategy will succeed, no matter how clear it is, no matter how well resourced it is. We're in a people business here, and it's people that make these things work. And so, whereas culture might seem like a nebulous concept and something that we spend a lot of time talking about, it really trumps everything else. So I guess if I was giving advice on this, I would say as a governor and a trustee myself, take every opportunity that you get to experience what makes your school or trust special. How relationships work, how success is celebrated, how people are supported and challenged to improve, and indeed how you deal with adversity, because there's a lot of that that comes our way, and that's the reality of the business we're in. The way we communicate and indeed the way we govern, how do we behave and present and act in our governing capacity, and is that reflection of how we want our school or trust to be known for and live by. So culture, is so important, and weaving those conversations about the culture and creating the right conditions for a strategy to succeed, they need to be part of those strategic discussions, and you'll know those opportunities when they come your way. When you see them, you will know them, and you should make the most of them. But certainly get into your schools and get talking to people, because that really is the way to experience the culture in your school and trust. So we're getting towards the end of the time we have available. I hope that you found that a useful sort of revisiting of some very important principles around developing strategy and doing what we need to do on behalf of our pupils. Please do look at the guides and let us know what you think and how indeed they can be improved. But we'll be talking more about these things, about values, strategy, and what makes governance so brilliant, really, and why we're so privileged to be involved in it. At our summer conference, we have a rich and varied program. We hope that as many of you as possible will be joining us at the Lowry in Salford on Saturday the 1st of July and enjoying what we have to offer. We have Diana Assaji, who's the founder and CEO of the Academy of Women's Leadership, and Diana will be touching in a very, in her own eloquent way on many of the things I've been speaking about and expanding on them. So please do, if you can make it, join us there. We'd love to see you. Always great to meet our members. Very excited just to add that we've just published on our e-learning platform, Learning Link, a new practical e-learning module on equality, diversion and inclusion, which is very much one of those underpinning themes of strategic discussions that we're having, discussions about values and culture, as I've just been saying, and some really interesting content there, which again we've collaborated with ASCL over to produce. So if you don't have a Learning Link, then I recommend that your board has it, because it's fantastic value and there's a wealth of content on it. If you do have it, do check out the EDI module, because I think you'll find that fascinating. And as I come to an end, I've mentioned the summer conference. Our next NGA webinar at the beginning of next month is a fascinating one, because we'll be learning from some of the, sharing some of the learning from our external reviews of governance that have been carried out in recent months. And there's a lot to take from those. If you're a governance professional tuning in, I hope very much to see you at our next network meeting on the 6th of July. We'll be talking about planning for the next term. And then in September, we've had to move our Multi-Academy Trust conference from when it was originally scheduled to take place in May to take place in September because of the industrial dispute with the trains. But we've got a fantastic conference planned for those of you who govern in Multi-Academy Trust. So as always, lots going on at NGA, and that's the way it should be, because you are what matters more than anything to us, really, our members, and a wonderful job that you do on behalf of our children and young people. So I'd like to thank you for that, as I always do, and I'd like to thank you for joining us and joining me at this webinar, and I hope to see you again very soon. So thank you. Bye-bye.